All right, good day, everyone, and welcome again to this wonderful day and a wonderful time we're going to have with Rebecca Prejean. Did I get that correct, Rebecca? Oh my,
Absolutely perfect.
you do not understand people, what it's like trying to get names. I'm terrible. Do you know what? I'm good with faces, but names is another thing altogether. So that was a great feat. I should have had people should have been clapping and cheering.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. Or someone appreciates me for sure. Rebecca, welcome. How are you today?
Doing very well. Thank you so much for having me, Eli.
It's nice to have you here. Now, I'm going to allow Rebecca to introduce herself because this is going to be a very interesting one because of her son and the business that she does. So this is going to be an interesting chat. So, Rebecca, I'm going to let you take it away. Just let us know what you do work-wise, and then we'll go with the flow as we usually do.
Sounds great. So my name is Rebecca Prejean. I actually create, I'll say, accessible learning experiences for people in corporate America. So I make sure that folks that have ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dysgraphia, all of those kinds of conditions can actually use training that people provide to them in the workplace. I also do consultations with organizations so that we can get some good policies and procedures in place to support neurodivergent folks and people with disabilities. I do the whole wide range of things. So videos, all the stuff.
Wow, but now you know the way she said that, she's been looking in the mirror and does it over and over and over again. You can tell that was just too easy, Rebecca. No two ways about that. But saying that, what made you actually go down this road to actually help neurodiversion, dyslexics, autism, to help with the workplace? What was the beginnings of your journey to take this route?
The beginnings of my journey really start with my son. He actually just turned 8 last week, but he was diagnosed with autism at the age of 4.
Okay.
And so really kind of getting into that world and understanding how many barriers were in place for him, how hard it was for us to find resources, to find information, to find people that understood, kind of his way of thinking, and the way he would adapt to the world around him was very hard. And so I started to find that correlation between our experience and just what I was seeing as a learning and development specialist, trainer, facilitator, already at my workplace. I would be training these rooms full of people, and some people would really struggle. And, management, we're all sitting in a room with just us talking about who's struggling, who's having problems, who's maybe not catching on. Should we continue to have them through this first 90-day period and all of these things? And, I really started to look at it as we're not asking the right questions. The
Mm.
question we should be asking is, what are we not doing to support people that might think differently? Like, people were really struggling, and we're just sitting there like, I hate to say it now, almost like horrible humans. Like, well, what can't they get? Our stuff is perfect. When really
Mm.
what we should have been asking is, how can we support people and maybe in a different way instead of giving everybody the same experience?
Yeah, no, totally. And I can see obviously with your son being diagnosed at 4, I can see how, the journey started. Um, but for your son to be or to have a test at 4 and be diagnosed, certain processes, certain things before then must have happened for you to want to help him
Oh
from
yeah.
that point of view to be tested. So when's the beginnings of everything when it comes to your son, when you thought something's not quite right? And I don't mean not quite right as in he's not right, but
Yeah.
something was different. So just take us right back as far as you can go and just let us know what changes that you thought, something's different here.
Well, in full transparency, we always knew he had the potential to maybe be a little different. When I was pregnant with him, maybe when I was 24 weeks
Okay.
along, they had actually told us during an ultrasound that he had hydrocephalus. And that's when you have additional fluid in the ventricles that are in the brain. And his was so severe, they told us that he would have seizures. They told us that he wouldn't walk, he wouldn't talk, all of these different things. And so when he was born, we were already, kind of clued into he might be different. He
Mhm.
seemed fine, absolutely fine, perfectly fine. Milestones were being met. And then probably around the age of 1, we started to see some differences. I started to notice he wasn't really looking people in the eye. He really wasn't the most social of children. I tell people all the time, he always moved to the beat of his own drum.
Okay.
He you could tell he would know things. He was very intelligent even then, but maybe he just wouldn't say it, or he just wouldn't communicate it, or he just always seemed a little different from other kids, which is perfectly fine. But he also had some problems with speech between one and a half, somewhere in there. That wasn't progressing. His walking wasn't
Mhm.
necessarily progressing. There were some very keen things that we were noticing, especially in the social um, element, that for me, as the mom, I was like, I'm thinking he might be on the spectrum. Everybody else said absolutely not. He's probably fine. I'm just thinking, no, I see him as possibly being on the spectrum, but we couldn't even get him really tested um, until the age of 4, when he was diagnosed. But there were definitely some things that clued us in when he was much younger.
Okay, when you let's go back a little, because you said you started to realize from the social side of things weren't quite right. So when you say social, what was happening for you to realize from the social there was issues?
He absolutely did not want to be around people. He would rather be in a corner reading books. Ethan is an avid reader, always has been. He taught himself to read probably between 1.5 and the age of 2. By two and
Wow,
a half, he was reading books, and
really?
yeah, really. I, we felt so weird because we bought Hooked on Phonics, thinking we're these great parents who are gonna teach our child to read, and he didn't even need it. Um,
Wow.
so it was an experience, but he always wanted to be in the corner reading books. He would never really be around people. He was also very hyper focused on certain things, like Pete the Cat. At that time was his main focus. He could recite by like what, 2.5, 3. He could recite full Pete the Cat books, like cover to cover. So he always kind of tended to just gravitate towards books more so
Okay.
than people, in a way that, there's always an introverted kid. That's perfectly fine, but this was more intense. He was also very sensitive to sound, like large groups of people. He couldn't stand it. He would pat his ears a lot. Um, just those kinds of things really,
Mm.
really keyed in. And like I said, he wouldn't really look you in the eye either. And he still doesn't. He will look anywhere but, direct eye contact if he can avoid it.
Okay. So let's talk about the sound side of it. How did that
Mhm.
affect him? How specifically did that affect it?
I mean, it still affects him to this day. If things are just too loud, if there's maybe too many sounds
Okay.
in the atmosphere, he really can't handle it. He will put his hands over his ears. He will say, turn it off. He'll say, turn it down. And it really impacts him now because he's in a classroom. It can range anywhere from 22 to like 27 kids. And so there's all the sound, there's all these people. And so some of the accommodations we have for him are being able to leave the room and have just a quiet space to himself,
Okay.
because it's like it's hard for him to focus when it's all of those things.
Mm.
It
Now,
used to be worse, actually. I thought about it. It used to be worse. Um, he's gotten okay. He hates singing. So even for his birthday, it sounds weird to people, we did not sing him happy birthday because he does not like it. It's something, I think, in the pitch, like certain pitches actually really bother him. So he's just not about it. He hates singing. It's
okay.
terrible.
So you say that he used to be worse. What was the turning point that, and what things were put into place to help him with the sound?
For us, we did a lot of just I would say sound desensitization. So a lot of more white noise when he's sleeping, a lot
Okay.
more just getting used to noises. Um, that seemed to help him a lot, because it's like, okay, it's not where I'm in complete quiet and then all of a sudden there's all the sound and it's overwhelming. So
Mm.
it's almost like building up to kind of the sound level. He still struggles with some things. I don't know if that part will ever quite go away, but he's much better than he was.
So basically what you did, you built some kind of threshold so he was in a position to, deal with that higher level and
Yeah.
be more tolerant in a way. How did you come across um, putting a plan together? Was it yourself, or did you get help for him, or what was the situation?
For that, we did a lot of research and put it in ourselves. We do a lot of that. Now, don't get me wrong, he has therapists, has had therapists. Right now, we're looking for a new occupational therapist because he doesn't have one. But in
Okay.
the absence of certain things, we have to fill in the gap. And so in that particular situation, I did a lot of research, a lot of nights reading, just to see what we could do. And, some people will tell you to put like earplugs. He didn't like those in his ears. There were just certain things that he's like, I don't like that. So when we got to the desensitization part and build a threshold, that worked for him because it didn't seem to bother him as much. He sleeps like a
Mm.
rock. So, so I think that really worked for him.
Wow. So you had to obviously try so many different things, and then you just had to start peeling away the layers to find out exactly what works for him. And that must have taken some time. Obviously, it's not a situation that works just overnight. It's a bit of patience, I take it.
Lots of patience, lots of grace for yourself
Hmm.
as a parent, because you try things and then they don't work. And you're like, but what is wrong with me that it didn't work? Like, what did I do wrong? And sometimes it's just, it didn't work because it didn't work. And it's just time to try something else. So a lot of time, a lot of patience, but a lot of grace that I don't think parents give themselves enough.
Yeah, I can imagine it was very difficult for you because as much as it's difficult for your son, um, like for instance, when you found out and you were pregnant, you were told he would never walk. He won't do this and he won't do that. Now that must have been a massive shock to you. How did you feel when you were told this, and what was going through your mind beyond that? How you were going to cope?
I started crying as soon as we got to the car.
Mm.
And it was just a flood of tears. I remember calling my mother in the car. I just could not stop crying. It was absolutely devastating to hear that. And when you're trying to digest it in the moment or whatnot, it
Mm.
is, you don't really believe it at first because that's not your expectation. When you think about having a baby, when you get pregnant,
Mm.
nobody imagines that these things happen, but they happen more often than we think and more
Mm.
often than we know, and nobody talks about it. So you feel weird. You feel like the odd one out because it's like, what did I do to make this happen? Because we don't talk about the
Mm.
anomalies of, that can happen when you're having a baby. We don't talk about those things. And when I started thinking about going forward, I'm like, I don't even know how to process this. How are we doing this? Can we do this? And I remember talking to my mother. We're all very close.
Uh-huh.
And I remember her saying, it's going to be okay. You have a community in terms of our family because we were prior military. So, we're a nucleus and very close bonded. And I just remember her saying, it's going to be okay. We're going to work through it. It's going to be fine. And I remember the turning point for me was really when we switched specialists. Because every time I went in to that specialist, it was
Mhm.
always, well, he doesn't have any more fluid in his brain, but I need to caution you that these things can still happen. And while that is true, and those things are true, I didn't need to hear it every week for the
Mm.
next, 10, 12 weeks. So we actually switched to another specialist in that same office. And he told us, you know, the human brain, the human body is different for everybody. Some
Yeah.
kids will have that same amount of fluid that your son has and be completely fine, no problems whatsoever. Kids that have less might be, along the seizure line or what have you.
Mm.
And so we don't really think about it until after the baby comes out. He's like, the only thing we're here to do is make sure that, you know, everything is fine, the baby's fine, mom's fine. And that's what we went with for the next like however many weeks. And it really did help to hear that.
So having that second person, making that change is what helped you prepare for what could be, basically.
Absolutely. And to just realize control is an illusion. Like you don't have any control over a lot of things. And so if you don't have control over it, you can't necessarily obsess about it. You've just got to kind of prepare and think about the things that could happen, but realize that this other possibility is over here as well. And we just won't know until, you know, the baby's here.
Okay, and so you had the support when it comes to the doctor. What other support did you have? Because I can only imagine it was very painful for what you were going through and apprehensive. So what other support system helped you get through to the other side when the baby came?
My family, 100%. I owe so much to my mother. At that point, like I said, we're all very, very close. I talk to my mother almost every day. If we don't talk, it's very odd. And then we're calling each other like, hey, have you heard from so-and-so? So we're all really close. And I really think that that particular support system really helped me. I'm like, my mom raised four of us. So I knew that she knew something about children.
Yeah, totally.
And you know, at the end of the day, even after he was born, they were really there to help me take care of him. I went to stay with my parents off and on for months because I was so scared of this baby. He was only like 5 pounds when he was born. Okay. And when I brought him home, he was actually 4 pounds, 10 ounces. So he was a tiny thing. And I was like, I don't know. I don't want to break it. Like, I don't want to break it. So I went and I stayed with them off and on, but they were a huge support for me, even during the times where we were making real decisions about, is he going to need brain surgery to put a shunt, like to drain fluid and things like that. So without my family, I don't think I really would have been in as good as a position. And I realize how blessed I am because not everybody has that. So I know and recognize how blessed and fortunate I was.
No, totally. I mean, support system is very powerful, whether that comes from friends, family, or whatever. And as much as we're strong individuals, the environment that we're in to support us is very important. So you now have a wonderful, wonderful son that's in, as much as, I know he was hard work, you know, but he is a gift, and I'm sure you feel that. But he's also inspired you along the way. You found out he's autistic. You've had the test, and you're now going through the years with him. I mean, how old is he now? How far are we now with him?
We are 8. And he will be going into 2nd grade next week. So we are a good 4 years into this at this point. 4 years into the autism journey is what I tell people, but really more like 6 years in terms of therapy, because we were putting him in therapy before he was diagnosed. So it feels like it's been a much longer journey. But
I can imagine.
But you know.
No, I can imagine. So now he's 8. Your business is inspired by him. When did that inspiration hit and thought, right, I'm going to do this business where I can help people in this way, that way? Where did that come about? When there was that turning point?
That turning point mentally probably happened. Wow. We are in 2004. That probably started in about 2020. Was when the mental shift really started to happen and take place. In terms of actualization, that still took at least another year or so. And it was brought on by a layoff. So I tell people all the time, layoffs, they are hard to go through, but sometimes you come out so much better on the other end of it. I was actually laid off in December Of golly, it's been a minute for now. I think 2021 or 20. I want to say 2021, maybe 2022. It's been a
Okay.
bit, but it was right around Christmas, about a week or so before. And I remember saying, I don't want to go through this anymore. I don't want to go through the rigmarole of corporate America, layoffs, being scared of being laid off. I would rather go and do what I want to do and fall on my face than continue to work in a corporate environment that doesn't speak to the people I want to speak to. And I don't know. I just went ahead and said, we're going to do this. And it has not always been easy. It has absolutely been rough, and we're still growing. We're still changing. We're still making moves and making waves. But for me, it was just the stake in the ground of, do I want to continue to do what other people want me to do and not necessarily reach the people that I know need to be reached? Or would I rather at least try to go it on my own, see what comes of it? And, you know, if I have to wade back into the pool of the corporate land, that land is always there.
Yeah.
There's always a corporate job that's out there for people. But doing this is something I wanted to speak to, because it's like, I see it's needed. Nobody's addressing it. It's just out there. Like, we're pretending like it's not there, but it's absolutely there, and people need assistance.
And regarding the corporate side of things, what was it that you was really against, that jarred with you, that didn't work, and you thought, you know, I'm not going to go through this again because of A, B, and C, and things need to change?
Completely looking at learning and development as just kind of this ancillary thing, not something to help build culture, not something to actually help employees succeed, just things to kind of check boxes. And those are things that don't jive well with me, because in truth, learning and development, especially in the corporate space, should be used to, yes, of course, talk about new products and give people some new skills, but it should also be there to help them succeed and to help them push forward and to push through things, as well as build a really functional culture in business. You know, all these courses that designers make, all these things that they do, really have the potential to not only help the employees, but really help the organization as well. And it's like, in most corporate spaces, they don't marry those two together. It's just not quite merged the way it should be, and it's always done in a way that speaks to just a specific set of people, like people who can digest meetings that have been repackaged as training. I say training loosely because it's not really training.
No, I know exactly what you're saying. What I've noticed in the last few years, that things seem to be changing for neurodivergent people, because a lot of the corporate companies now are starting to learn that we're actually gifted at making the difficult decisions, and being focused in particular ways. We have a gift in that way. And I've noticed there seems to be a slight shift, but that shift is going in the direction of, actually, you know, they're great leaders, or they can do this, and etc. Are you seeing that yourself?
I'm seeing it from some. I'm not seeing it from all.
Okay.
And I feel like the ones I'm not seeing it from, it's not because they don't care. That is something I'm convinced of. It's not that they don't care. It's not even that they don't want to do these things. Sometimes it's they don't know how to do these things. Sometimes they are scared to do these things because they're like, I just don't know even where to start. And some people are just scared to do it because they don't want to make mistakes. Nobody wants to make mistakes, and nobody wants to be the company that ends up on LinkedIn as, you know, as the subject of like an open letter about something they did wrong.
Yeah, that's true.
So
yeah, it's a bit of an experiment, I suppose, at the moment, until things start to hit the mainstream, which I suppose will take some time. So, like all these things, you know.
yeah.
So, okay, so we've got to the stage where we know that corporate is still struggling to change, but you're willing to change and make that change and help corporate change. So you've got to the stage where, all right, I'm going to help corporate change. How are you going to do that? What do you do to help corporate change?
I talk business. One thing I tell a lot of people who ask me that question, like, so how do you get people to buy in? Sometimes it's just as simple as changing the language, because I'm a firm believer that people in the C-suite speak a very different language from people who might be in L&D or from other sectors. They think bottom line a lot. They think revenue. They think stakeholders, right?
Mhm.
Because essentially their stakeholders are their bosses. So they do have to answer to them in some ways. And so there's always this weird place of, I hear you. Accessibility sounds nice. It seems like a nice thing to have. It seems like an important thing to have. How do I convince people in the stakeholder land
Mhm.
that this is actually good for the business as well as for the people? Because they might not be hearing people speak, as I call it. They're hearing, money speak. And so for me, I talk about things like increased revenue, increased innovation, lower turnover rates, things like that, because those are true stats that are out there. There's true concrete proof. And so when you start putting it in that position, it actually gives them some ammunition as well to maybe tell their stakeholders, hey, so this is our new implementation plan that we're doing. We're going to create some new trainings to teach people how to we'll do sell some things, but we're going to do it and make sure that it's accessible so that all of our people can do these things. And this is why we're doing it. So they can actually translate between the two. So I kind of tend to bridge that gap a lot. And that's usually where I start, because I want them to understand that there is a return on investment. Yes, this does cost money. Does it cost a ton of money all the time? No. Can it? Yes, depending on what we're doing. If we are retrofitting like videos, if we're retrofitting, graphics, if I'm having to redesign things, yes, those things cost money. But it doesn't always have to be that way. We can start small. We can do closed captions, alt text, easy wins, essentially, for accessibility. And then we can kind of track what that looks like. Maybe you have a new training coming out. Fabulous. You want to make it accessible, but you might not have a ton of money, or, there might be this weird gray area in the budget and you have to prove, where that's going. Cool. Let's do some closed caption. Let's do some alt text for this course. Let's actually set up a process to assess it, a process to evaluate it, and then check back in with that same group of people that took that training in a month, 3 months, 6 months. And let's see how their productivity might have increased, how their innovation might have increased, what new ideas have come out of it. How many people did you actually keep from that? And then let's talk about, maybe after we see the good success there, let's talk about, what this can look like further down the line too, implementing larger things. So for me, I like to call myself as just the Kickstarter. I'm here to come into essentially your wheelhouse, your system, and see where we can fit accessibility in the immediate. It may not be everything that I want to do in that moment, but I'm a patient lady. I can wait it out and work through it, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't tend to come in as like a storm or anything like that, because that's not the goal.
Yeah.
The goal ultimately is to get people comfortable with this stuff and to normalize it and to make it part of their culture. And that takes a while when you're coming into companies that already have established cultures and established processes.
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge. I can imagine trying to, you're doing something quite fresh and new. So to change people's mindset is hard enough. And especially when money's involved, that's even harder.
Yeah.
So it is a challenge, and a great challenge at that. And how do you find, is it easier to actually communicate in a positive way to change the culture set of a company, whether they're smaller or larger, or it doesn't really matter? Or what's the pain point when it comes to trying to communicate with companies, and why?
I think the main pain point is just lack of awareness. Honestly, that is truly the pain point that we're dealing with, where people don't really understand what it is. Some people don't understand what some of these things can look like in practice. You know, I've had people talk about ADHD in particular, and I feel like they talk about that a lot simply because you hear people say it kind of flippant. Even though they may have never been diagnosed with ADHD, if they can't seem to focus, they'll sit there and slip in, oh, my ADHD is acting up today.
Okay.
And so I feel like it's created a little bit of just a false narrative.
Okay.
So people don't really understand what some of these things look like in action. And so if they run across somebody who might have something like autism or ADHD or dyslexia, they might just not really believe what they're seeing. Like, that doesn't look like what I recognize it to be, or, you know, what I know of autism to be. Like, I'll use my son as an example. People meet him and they see him, and they don't even know he's autistic until, like, he may not look them in the face, or he may not communicate in the same way, or something like that. And so you can tell always that they're kind of like, oh, there's a difference of some sort. And it's not like I hide it. So if they were to ask something, I'm absolutely going to say it, but I'm also not going to put his business out there. That's his private business.
Yeah, of course.
In that way. So I see that in real life too.
No, without a doubt. Okay, so what can businesses take from what you do for them, and how can they scale in a positive way for the long term? So you've already described what you do with the businesses and try to change their culture, but how can they take things to the next level? So you're trying to change the culture. What other things can you change other than the culture?
Other than just the culture, I also focus on their leaders. I focus on leaders a lot.
That's true.
Yeah, because their leaders, I read a statistic a few weeks ago, I think it's like 50% of managers don't feel prepared to manage people who might be neurodivergent or who might have, you know, these kinds of things going on. And so I focus on leadership a lot, lots of leadership development. And it's really focusing on things like awareness, but things like learning how to communicate better. I know people are like, well, you know, that's a normal thing, but it's not, because neurodivergent people have different communication styles. So it's also learning how to balance some kind of personability with professionalism as well. Because I'm not asking anybody to be a friend. I understand business is business and outside is outside. I'm a firm believer in that myself. But you do have to have a personable quality to get to know your employees in terms of how they work and how they function. So it's like finding that balance between, I am your leader, I tell you to do X, you need to go do this. And I need you to do X. What can I do to support you in that? Those are two very different conversations that I tend to have. So I do usually use leadership as the way to scale it. Because once leadership can have those conversations, then we can talk about KPIs. We can talk about implementing KPIs, measurements and things, so that we can talk about performance reviews and we can talk about accountability. Like, this is how people should be scaling. You know, we have all these random KPIs. We have all these random performance metrics for all of these things. And we don't talk to our employees at all. We don't think about anything that these people can do, what they should do. Do they have accommodations? So it's like working on the leaders first to make sure they understand these are the conversations you should be having. These are the things that you should be asking. And now let's roll this into this performance evaluation and the KPIs that should be measured for these folks. And once people have a clear-cut idea of where their KPIs should be, where their performance should be, pretty much where their goals are, and it's communicated to them properly, then you will see your business grow. Like, it cannot grow if you're just throwing stuff out there, like, about product. That's not going to help your business grow. Your people are going to help your business grow.
Okay, so that sounds great. Now, you know how to deal with leaders and communicate with the leaders. But when it comes to, okay, you've dealt with the culture, you've spoken to the leaders, is there a different way of actually training? I don't like teaching, training the leaders the environment of the company, is there a different way of training them for autistic people how to deal with autistic or ADHD, or is neurodivergence a situation where everyone's tarred with the same brush, or do you have to do something specific depending on the divergence that they have?
Good question. And the way I will answer it is this. So everybody who's neurodivergent is different. I have yet to meet somebody who's exactly the same. They might have things that overlap, but everybody's a little different. So you can't approach everything with the same brush. What I do tell leaders, because it's very hard to differentiate in such a way, and you're not going to know who has what, because you shouldn't be asking that because it's illegal, is making sure they have best practices. So it's not necessarily training people to deal specifically with this type of autistic person or this type of dyslexic person or what have you. It is approach them as an actual person first thought. Ask them questions that you should be asking all your employees. So, you're having a performance measurement conversation, what have you. It stops being a, do you have autism? Oh, so you need this, to, so I'm seeing this. Can you tell me maybe what's going on or how you're approaching this? Okay, you're telling me you're having these problems or difficulties. How can I support you in that? It becomes it's about training people to have very different conversations, and training them also that, like I said, everybody is different. So just because you might suspect, so-and-so over here has autism because of your friend or family member that has autism, doesn't necessarily mean that that's the case. They could have something that mirrors autism. I mean, there's all kinds of overlap. And so you have to take your bias and your previous thought process out of it and literally just look at the person first. So when I talk about training a lot, I tell people, get your mind out of just, I want to learn how to speak to autistic people, or I want to speak to ADHD people. You have to start treating people as people. And that's why I go back to that balance, because some leaders are like, well, I don't really want to get to know them on a personal level. Not telling you to. I'm asking you to get to know them within the work context. Like, people are still people at work, folks.
I'll tell you what, that sounds so beautiful. Treat people as individuals. And I love that, because we are very unique, no matter whether we're neurodivergent or not. So, right. So you deal with leaders, the corporate world, etc. Do you actually work one-to-one with individuals?
I have. It is a much more specialized thing, and I've only had a few companies actually ask me for that, because it usually does come from the company itself. Like, they'll put out an email and say, hey, we have like an accessibility consultant. If you want to set up a meeting, do that. And so I will do that. I said, not many companies have offered that, but I'm always open to it. And to me, that takes a lot of courage for that person who sets up the appointment, because you're disclosing that information to me. And I mean, we all know that is not an easy task to do. So it becomes a matter of just really trying to work with the individuals in the best way possible. So if it's, hey, I'm having this problem with my boss, I don't know how to deal with it. I don't want to tell them that I'm dyslexic, or I don't want to tell them I have ADHD. How can I navigate through that? I'll bring my expertise from both sides to some extent. While I myself am not neurodivergent, I know a lot about how leadership thinks about that kind of thing. I know how we have to approach it from my experience with my son, and so we'll merge the two. So it's helping them have those conversations, or helping them create maybe an outline for a conversation, giving them talking points, giving them just places to focus, to support them through that journey, because everybody needs support really on both sides at the end of the day.
Yeah, totally with that. And with that, that's a wonderful way to end a beautiful podcast. I must admit, you got me smiling. It's nice that you can support people that really do need the help, and at the same time helping people understand the people that need the support, which is beautiful. And I really do, and I appreciate you sharing your journey with your son. How wonderful that was too. Rebecca, is there anything you want to let people know in the form of anything that we haven't spoken about that you think people should know to help on their journey?
I would say the one thing I always say, give grace. Give grace to yourself, give grace to each other. We're in a world that has a lot of unprecedented problems. A lot of unprecedented things are happening, and things can feel hard, and they can feel hard all the time. But it's about giving yourself grace and knowing that as long as you're trying, as long as you're doing the things that you know you can do, that's what matters at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you're totally right. And a wonderful way to finish off. Rebecca, how can they contact you?
Yes, so people can contact me via email, Rebecca.Prejean at ebgc.net, but they can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. I post almost every day, tips, strategies, all of the things. People can message me through there. And in about a week, they can reach out. I am actually starting a community online for professionals who want to learn about accessibility. So I'll have some different resources in there that I create, some different templates for PowerPoint, accommodations, things, all the stuff. We'll have QA sessions. It's going to be a good time. So.
Well, wonderful. Well, as always, what I'll do is I'll put the information down below so they're able to catch that information and contact you, Rebecca. In the meantime, Rebecca, thank you for being on with us and giving us your precious time. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Trust it's our pleasure. In the meantime, listeners, we will be here another day with another wonderful person giving plenty of gold, and we would like to say sayonara.